Let's explore more bloodlines in Part 2. The Collins Bloodline. The Collins bloodline made their money primarily through insurance companies and international money exchanging. It is said that they were the first Illuminati bloodline to come to America, so their blood is held in very high esteem. It is said that in 1955, the grandmother of the High 13 was Mother Collins. They believed that she held more occult DNA than any other woman of the powerful 13. Those in the know said, the grandmother Collins dresses in black and sits upon an ebony and gold, moon-shaped throne. With a pedal at her foot, she can automatically rotate the throne so she can address the Grand Council of Wizards behind her without rising. Then she can rotate again to her lessers, groveling in front of her. The moon throne is, of course, a symbol of Zion, whom the ancients saw as the moon. The eyewitness continued saying that Grandmother Collins wore a great deal of jewelry. The men in attendance each placed a small gold brick at her feet as an offering. Directly behind her, on either side, stood two young Collins boys. It is said that one of these was John Todd Collins. These boys passed out timetables for various plans, and the meeting was all about furthering the one-world Zionist government mockery and what they had accomplished to date, as well as things that had gone wrong and how they might correct these mistakes next time. 7 children, dressed in white, were brought from generational satanic families and laid prostrate before Grandmother Collins, worshiping her. She had a scepter with a snake's head that had a battery inside and was basically a taser. This way she could bite those she touched with it, and it was considered magic. Once all 7 children were approved by her, 7 other children, less worthy, were brought in, and each one was sacrificed in front of the other 7, 1 for 1. Then the 7 remaining children had to write their names into the coven book with a quill, using their atoning child's blood for the ink. This was a blood oath.
Doesn't matter that I signed a blood oath. Doesn't matter anymore. The Illuminati's real. I'm a member.
The spared children then swore an oath to the mother, and she pressed her foot pedal and rotated to face the 13 high wizards. She declared, "This is tomorrow's chosen generation, the chosen few." The eyewitness then said that the Black John the Anti-Baptist entered to announce the coming of the Antichrist to the world. John Todd Collins, the boy who was reported there behind the mother, later had the courage to escape. He did this, as all who have successfully escaped do, by calling out to Jesus Christ for help. We'll let John speak for himself.
I come from a family where I grew up having my own heroes. My number one hero was my great, somewhere way back there, grandfather, named Francis Collins. Francis Collins owned the first ship that the Puritans landed in here. It just so happened that 50% of the people on board were also witchcraft people fleeing from Scotland. And they were called the Collinses. They were all his family, and that's how all witchcraft came to the United States. So when I grew up, I was being trained how great my family was, that it was the second most important family in the Illuminati and the occult world, and that someday I'd be very important and so on. So I had my own heroes. If you wondered why that fits with Todd's, the Collins family changed their name about 100 years ago to Todd to cover up some of the things that they had done. But I'm sure some of you will remember the show Dark Shadows. That was the show that paid for me to come to Hollywood to bring the diaries. Many of the scripts were taken from actual incidences in the diaries. And, for instance, Barnabas Collins was based upon a man named Prince Williams Collins. When I was growing up in the occult world, we were always taught that we had been somebody else before. It wasn't good enough that we were the person we were now. We always had to be a dozen people that we were before. We had to deal with this life and all the ones we were supposed to have had before and all the ones we were going to have in the future. And I was supposed to be in Prince Williams Collins. So I said that's who they based Barnabas on, so I wasn't exactly the nicest guy in the world. I grew up this way. When I was 13, I was taken into what is called the outer court to be trained as a priest in witchcraft. When I was 18, I was initiated a high priest. That would have made me the pastor. At the same time, I became draft exempt. I did not have to go into service, but a bunch of us smart-aleck young wizards and witches went into the Army because we felt the Army really needed witchcraft. It just couldn't get along without us. My time was almost up, so I was discharged, and the same day I re-enlisted. I asked for Vietnam, and they said because of my wounds that hadn't totally healed yet, I couldn't go to Vietnam yet, so I got Germany. Now, I had re-enlisted for 6 years, and until the time of my re-enlistment, I always thought that witchcraft was just witchcraft. There was nothing more to witchcraft than just casting spells, and that we were smarter than the Christians and other religions because we really knew who the gods were, and we were born with special powers because our ancestors had passed them down to us, and all the little stories they like to tell us. You know, many of you were raised as Christians, and I guess that's why I can't understand why some of the Christian teenagers are the way they are today. If they were raised in this glorious gospel, why they're so rebellious. I would have given anything to have been raised this way. But when you were learning the 23rd Psalm, I was learning the witch's chant. When you were reading about Moses opening the Red Sea, I was reading J.R.R. Tolkien. This is the way I grew up, and this is all I believed in, was just that there were mighty gods and we were special people. We were their priests and priestesses. Until I re-enlisted. I went to Germany, spent a month home, went to Germany, spent another month. 2 months out of a 6-year enlistment. One night while taking drugs and drinking, I shot and killed an officer in downtown Stuttgart. Now, if there's one thing that the Army does not like, it does not like its sergeants killing its officers. And as the court-martial proceeded on, and things began to look like I was going to spend the rest of my life in Leavenworth if I was lucky, one of the men that was placed in the cell with me had been scheduled to get out that particular day, so I kind of talked him in by bribing him a little that if he made a long-distance phone call for me and told certain relatives of mine that I was in trouble, he'd receive some money for it, and I'd be a lot happier. So he called collect to Los Angeles and talked to my foster mother, explained what the situation was. And I was sitting back waiting for her to get all these big witches together to cast spells on the judges and make all the officers that were trying me think I was a real nice guy and that it was self-defense and everything was going to be fine. They'd just let me off. Now, that's all that I had ever been taught that witches could do. But 3 days later, my cell door opened there in solitary. As I stepped out in the light for the first time in 32 days, I heard some very strange words. You are honorably discharged from the United States Army. And the man that was saying them was a senator by the name of William Saxby. He had a congressman with him named Wiley and about 3 or 4 generals, and they were handing me an honorable discharge. And on the discharge papers, it didn't say I was bad, didn't say that I had been in jail, didn't say anything. It gave me all my time and rank, security clearances that I had in my possession, and didn't explain why I still had over 5 years to go in the United States Army. It just discharged me honorably. So I took it and didn't want to argue with him and left and went back to the States and arrived at my home in Columbus, Ohio. I asked my real mother, I have 2 mothers, foster mother and a real mother. I said, what type of spell is so good that it makes senators and generals do what you want? And it's a really good spell. I'd like to learn it. She just looked at me and said, you just don't understand, do you? She said, we didn't cast a spell on them. They're with us. I said, oh, far out. Senators that are witches. She says, no, they just belong to us. And I didn't understand what she was saying, and I said, well, what am I supposed to do now? You know, I'd like to take my old cove and back over and so on. So she handed me an envelope that had been waiting there. She had explained that there was one there and one in Los Angeles. They didn't quite know where I was going to show up. I opened the envelope. Very intriguing thing. $2,000 in $100 bills. A lot of money. Also was a one-way plane ticket to New York City. I said, well, what's this for? She said, well, you make a reservation, you get on the next plane, you get out of here and you get to New York City and they'll meet you at the airport. I said, well, who are they? And where did this money come from? She says, you get there and they'll tell you and you'll know who's supposed to meet you when you get there. Now, witches are very curious people, and this was extremely intriguing. So I got on the plane and I flew to New York, and I got off the plane. Sure enough, no problem with recognizing who met me. I'd read his books for years. In fact, he's the man who first created Christian witchcraft. His name was Dr. Raymond Buckland, head of the anthropology department, Columbia University. At that time, he isn't now. Graduate of Oxford University, Rhodes Scholar, handpicked by the Rothschilds to lead the Illuminati for him. So I arrived, and he took me to his house, and next few months he carefully rearranged all my ideas for me. He told me that all the things that I had learned about witchcraft were just stories that we told the lower people. And where I thought there was only 3 levels and I was as high and as powerful as a witch could go, he assured me there were 3 more. I guess I should have backed off then and figured if I was lied to the first time, maybe I'd be lied to the second time. But as I said, witches have an incurable curiosity. They've got to find out everything. So I let him train me, and he explained to me that since I was a male Collins, I was in the Collins family, that I had a position to take. And that there was a board of directors called the Grand Druid Council, which contained 13 of the most powerful witches in the world. And that my place was on that council. And I said, oh, great. When do I take it? And he said, well, somebody just died. I kind of always wondered if he died or they shot him or something. You never can tell in the Illuminati. But he sent me to Los Angeles. I studied for 6 more months with my foster mother, holding kind of a temporary rank on this council, and then taking up to Colorado Springs and initiated. And I do believe that when I testified here at the last time, I explained who the person was that handed me the ceremonial knife for that ceremony, another senator named George McGovern.
Being a famous Collins, John was later kidnapped, and many attempts to restring his Pinocchio programming were tried.
There are no strings on me.
When they failed to turn his mind back into a puppet, he was murdered and at last found peace. He held on, despite his torture, because he finally understood what the Lord meant when he said, ultimately all they can do is take your life, and then they can take no more. Many have escaped when their spirit mind cried out to Jesus. The occult knows this, and so they work hard to attack all forms of Christianity and to attach to their own whenever these go to church for a break. The elites are caught in a conundrum, because sometimes their victims need an escape to maintain their sanity, but if they discover that it really can be an escape, they might not come back. We'll have more on this. Some of the Todd family, and some of the Bush family, and some of the Crowley family are subsets of the Collins bloodline. Why would an ancient famous occult family go from Collins to Todd? Todd is a Middle English word from Northern England that means a fox. In British witchcraft, a fox is equal to the number 666, or an antichrist.